Requesting the audience to please settle down. Thank you. Out damned spot on crime fiction. The first speaker. She is labeled the Desi Agatha Christie. She has published 8 books. Her The Cosmic Clues has been selected as a killer book by Mystery Booksellers of America, and The Astral Alibi has been honored as notable fiction in the Kiriyama Prize. An independent filmmaker, she is also the founder and festival director of the Pune International Literary Fest. Her unpublished psychological thriller novel was adapted into a Hindi film by NFDC titled Kuch Dil Ne Kaha. Please welcome Manjiri Prabhu. I'll get that to be a little louder in a second. Clearly you got your fans over there. This speaker is a professor and former chairperson of the English department at Punjab University, Chandigarh. She is a recipient of several national and international fellowships. As a creative writer, she has published a collection of poems, a play, and 3 novels. The latest is Amaryllis Avenue. Former chairperson of the prestigious Chandigarh Sahitya Academy, she is presently the chief functionary of MELO, the Society for the Study of the Multi-Ethnic Literature of the World. Please welcome Manju, Jaidka. He began life as a software engineer till he realized his true vocation as a full-time writer. His first novel, Murder in Amravati, was longlisted for the Commonwealth Book Prize in 2013. His Hastinapur series attempts to tell the story of the Mahabharata through the thoughts and lives of their picks, lesser-known female characters. Please welcome Sharath, Komarraju. The next speaker is the Indo-Swedish author of popular comic thrillers Once Upon a Time in Scandinavista and Mr. Majestic. He has 11 books translated into several languages. His latest detective novel, Hari, A Hero for Hire, is a classic. His books range from best-selling detective fiction to history and travelogue. He is a frequent contributor to National Geographic Traveler magazine and also a columnist with the Hindu Business Line and an influential literary critic. Please welcome Zach Oyer. And the last speaker up here, she is a recipient of the Uttarakhand Ratna 2014. A Haridwar-based writer, she is the author of 3 works of fiction: A Bridge to Nowhere, God is a River, A Story of Faith, and The White Shadow. Her awards, among others, include the Woman of Substance from the All India Women's Conference, Hindustan Times Woman of the Year Award, Reader's Choice. She writes regularly for HT Online Paper, HMA Annual Souvenir, BHEL magazines, and various science journals. Please welcome Mona Verma. I've been saying this to all the panelists before this. You see these empty chairs, they will be packed in the next 10 minutes. Okay. Have a wonderful session.
Good evening, Bangalore, and welcome to this session, Out Damned Sport. As most of you over here in love with crime fiction would certainly know, this is a quote from Macbeth, quoted by Lady Macbeth, one of Shakespeare's most noted works amongst all the others, of course, where Lady Macbeth is hallucinating, sleepwalking in her castle and trying to wash her hands and try to rub off the spots of blood she has on her hands. And from the murder she and her husband Macbeth have committed for power and for money. And the spot stays. The spot stays because her guilt stays. It is a dark, conflicted soul that comes out saying, out damned spot, but it just doesn't go. Over here, I welcome my panelists, Zach, Sharath, Manjiri, and Manju. Talking of crime fiction here, it is a literary genre that fictionalizes crime, their detection, the criminals, their motives. It is usually distinguished from other fiction like historical fictions and other thrillers and science fiction. But but the boundaries are very, very indistinct. But not why I'm saying the boundaries are very indistinct in these times, because the panel over here is a very eclectic mix of somebody who's picked up the rustic flavors of Bangalore, somebody who's writing on the Hastinapur series, and hence mythology comes into play over here and is a very potent thread in all of his writings. And then we have Vedic astrology over here and different kind of crimes, including the academic crimes and terrorism that also we are talking about. But the mainstream remains the same. It is the suspense and the mystery which forms the background of all crime thrillers. Crime fiction has certain subgenres like detective fiction, like whodunit, courtroom dramas, thrillers, but it's the suspense and mystery that we will be talking about over here and the whodunit. I'll start with the first question to Manju. In your book, Amalthas Avenue, Greek mythology comes into play in the form of Fall of Icarus. Tell us something about your work and the different kind of crimes that your work has branched into, including academic crime, the political reasons for committing a crime, and also terrorism over here.
Thank you, Mona. Icarus is a character in Greek mythology who is the overreacher. He is given wings of wax so that he can fly very high, but then he's warned, don't fly too high because the sun is going to melt your wings. However, because he's the overreacher, because he's ambitious, he flies very high and the wings melt and he lands, he falls into the sea, and that's the end of Icarus. So this is the story of an overreacher, of an ambitious person who meets his doom. Now, in my book, Amalthas Avenue, which Mona just mentioned, it is an academic novel. It's a campus novel. And we have a character who is ambitious. He wants to reach the top, and he's not very particular about the means that he uses. Now, what happens is that a day comes, he has to pay the price for what he's done, unwittingly, and I have delved into his psychology. What happens when he becomes the victim, so to speak, of a certain crime of a great magnitude which takes place on the campus. So that is what I talk about in my first novel. In my last novel, most recent novel, which came out last year, Amalthas Avenue. But as Mona said, you find crime in different genres. You can't really pigeonhole it into any one particular genre. In an earlier novel, which was Candle Point, I made use of the historical background. It was a historical romance that I created. And in that, there's a crime that takes place on a national level for political reasons. Similarly, an earlier novel of mine talked about a crime that takes place in the wake of terrorism. So under the garb of terrorism, a lot of unscrupulous elements surface, and there are lots of unpleasant things that keep happening. So briefly, this is what I talk about, the different kinds of crime in my books.
Yes, I agree that various insanities come into play in the garb of terrorism. India, I guess, has witnessed a whole lot of them. Next question to Manju here. Manjiri here, sorry. Manjiri, your work is a tribute to your mother, who's a noted astrologer herself, and you have used Vedic astrology in your works to bring out your book, Stellar Signs. How were the impressions so strong and so persistent that you wanted to write about a crime thriller? You wanted to write a crime thriller using Vedic astrology. Tell us about it.
Hello? Yeah, you can hear me, right? Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. So you have to first understand that astrology has been a part of my house ever since I was a kid. I grew up with a lot of astrology around me because my mom is an astrologer. So I've been pestering her for little things like finding lost items, asking her for the results of exams, or even if, does this guy like me?
Yes, I was coming to that. What about love life and astrology?
Yes,
they go hand in hand.
Yes, exactly. So I've really pestered her for that. But what really changed was that once, I'd like to share a story with you. a lot of people do still consult my mother, and there was this Bollywood producer who came to her one day and said it was very urgent and he had to ask her something. So he gave her his horoscope and said, please tell me if, I'm sorry, are there any youngsters here? Because it's a little adult. Yeah, but that's all right. So he said, please tell me when I will have a son. So my mom looked at the horoscope for a long minute and finally she looked up and said, do you want to know the truth? And he said, yes, please tell me. So she said, okay, you have a son, but you can't claim him as yours. And that guy was totally flabbergasted. He didn't know that astrology could tell him this, that he had an illegitimate child. So when she told me this, narrated this to me, I realized that astrology is such a powerful tool. And what it really can do is, it's like an X-ray of a person. And whether you believe in it or not, you can definitely predict the character of a person. And I wondered why it wasn't used in crime solving ever before, whether in literature or even in real life. And that is how the series The Cosmic Clues and Astro Lullaby came about, where Sonia Samarth, who's India's first astro detective, uses horoscopes to solve mystery cases.
So wonderful out there, but anyone who has a secret they don't want to leak out, you know which place not to go to now over there. So now, Sharath, coming to you. From Murder at Amravati to the Hastinapur series has been quite a sharp oblique there, from Padmavati to Amba, Gandhari and Kunti, who you consider as women relegated to the sidelines in the Mahabharata, is certainly a very, very interesting transition there. And considering that he had no interest in mythology and he came up with this brilliance, this element comes as very, very surprising to us. What would you like to say about this?
It is actually not true that I didn't have an interest in mythology until I wrote the Hastinapur series. I have always had an interest in mythology. I have just never thought that I would write a novel, a mythological novel. So my first 3 books were murder mysteries, straight murder mysteries, of which Murder in Amravati is one. And that is where Padmavati comes in, Padmavati the prostitute. Whereas the Hastinapur series talks about the Mahabharata story, but it tells the story from the point of view of all of the secondary characters. So the people you don't really hear from ever, like Amba, or
Gandhari, Kunti.
Not even Kunti Gandhari, even at least Kunti Gandhari gets some of the story, right? But things, people like Ganga, Satyavati, the really minor characters. I thought there may be value in writing the Mahabharata story from those people's point of view. So that was the only transition from one genre to another.
Okay. Yeah, I guess mythology is very, very interesting, and so many aspects of mythology go untouched. When in fact I was writing my 3rd book, The White Shadow, I came across this information that Dhritarashtra just didn't have 100 sons. He had a daughter also, Dushala. But Dushala is not mentioned anywhere. So I guess with new age writers over here can delve into those hitherto unexplored mediums and bring out those characters, which Sharath has also done. Coming to Zach, from the much acclaimed biography on Mahatma Gandhi, you seem to have taken a very giant leap in discovery of Bangalore, and most of the Bangaloreans, I believe, can connect with a cyber cafe owner, a cabbie, and a video pirate. And we people can relate to it. And tell us about your fascination for these characters and what brought out the story of Mr. Majestic and Hari.
See, actually, what happened was that I started out as a very young child as a fan of genre fiction, of detective fiction. I read all the Sherlock Holmes and graduated to James Bond and then to Alistair MacLean. And that was like what I really grew up on and what really made me start reading. And then when I started writing myself in my late teens, I of course tried to emulate these things. Like I wrote like a Sherlock Holmes type of novel and things like that. And I wrote James Bond type stories. And people were telling me that, man, if you want to get published, you have to be serious. You can't write this trash and pulp and nobody will touch it, even with a barge pole. So I struggled to get serious and I started reading all these boring books by important writers to learn how to be boring and serious. And my first published novel was like a very serious novel, terribly boring, but it got like critically acclaimed. It didn't sell many 100 copies and anything like that. And I but people kept sort of egging me on that this is the right kind of thing to do. You have to take literature seriously. You can't have too much fun. It can't be racy and all that. You have to be like really serious. And so I had a very schizophrenic relationship to literature because I was really dreaming about writing detective novels, but then I was forced to be a serious writer. And then I was writing these non-fiction books like a biography on Mahatma Gandhi, for example, which is more of a journalistic type of work actually, and which was very popular and in Sweden, and it was published in Denmark and Norway as well, and some other countries. So like I got a lot of credit for that, but like I really didn't get the satisfaction that I craved for. And then finally I told myself that I really have to do what I want to do. And then I found my way back to crime fiction. And it happened in this very peculiar way because at some point I moved to Bangalore about 15 years ago. I settled here in this wonderful city. And the one thing was that I was like looking in the bookshops for like local detective novels, because whenever I travel to somewhere, like if I go to New York, I pick up a New York thriller. If I go to Los Angeles, I pick up a detective novel set in Los Angeles. If you go to Stockholm, you'll find like so many detective novels, like the Millennium Trilogy and all these books that are set in every Swedish city. Basically, has a detective novel series in it. Like there's even a village with a population about 925 people on the west coast of Sweden, which has the setting for some 10 serial murder psychopath novels. And I'm just thinking to myself, like, how many psychopaths do you need to decimate 925 villages to zero,
yes,
you know?
Yes,
really.
I second you on that, yes.
And you get detective novels set in Botswana, Japan, all over. But like in the Bangalore bookshops, there were hardly any crime novels, like that local crime novels, something that would describe, say, Majestic area or Shivaji Nagar or MG Road, or where you would have a murder near the cantonment station, or these kind of places. So I was thinking to myself, like, why doesn't anybody write detective novels set in Bangalore? Yes. Like you could find something like from Kolkata, like Feluda by Satyajit Ray and that Bonkesh Bakshi, and there's some thrillers from like Bombay and some bigger cities. But like Bangalore, there was hardly anything in those days. Like I'm talking about 10 years ago. Yes. I was asking myself, why doesn't anybody write Bangalore detective novels? And then I was looking at myself in the mirror and say, hey, you're a writer. And
why don't you do it?
Why don't
you break the mold?
And then I sort of started thinking, okay, maybe that's a good idea, and let's see what happens. So it started very much like an experiment. I had no clue whether it would click or not. And I watched a lot of Kannada action movies, you know.
Okay, Kannada action movies.
They're very good, especially real star Upendra's films. You know, they're so like thrilling and funny, and he's like the king of one-liners. You know, there's like one line where he puts like a BD in a old cigarette filter and says, "Filter BD," and then he puts in on his sunglasses and says, "Cooling glasses." You know, like this kind of crazy action movies. And so I started writing very much inspired by Kannada cinema. And the funny thing is that now these Kannada filmmakers have come back to me and asked to buy the rights for my books to make into Kannada movies. So I was thinking like, my God, here I'm stealing ideas from your films and you want to buy them back from me.
So if one wants to write about life has come a full circle, Zach can be the hero there for all of us. So life has come a full circle from Kannada writer to Zach, back to Kannada writer. Exactly. And then probably back to Zach. Okay, back to Manju once again. Manju, psychological questions are very integral to crime fiction, whether to establishing the motive of a crime or diagnosing the root cause of a deranged or a criminal mind. So these days, the investigator also has to act like a psychoanalyst. It's not only the question of who done it, it is also a question of why done it. What do you have to say there?
You're absolutely right, because after all, when you are writing, you have to make your characters credible, whether you're writing about a hero or whether you're writing about a villain or a criminal. So if you just talk about a criminal, somebody committing a crime, it will not go down very well with the audience, with the reader, unless there are unless you explain how the mind works, what goes into the making of the mind. And if you can explain that, then you'll be reaching out to your audience much better. You talked about Lady Macbeth right in the beginning, and I think that's a very good example, because before the crime is committed and even after the crime is committed, Shakespeare takes us into the mind of Lady Macbeth.
Yes.
Why is she doing it? How does she incite? It's not just a question of who done it.
It's a question of why done it.
Why done it, and also how done it. Also
Yes,
how done
of
it.
course.
So she's the one who incites her husband. Then they kill the King Duncan. And after that, she just cannot get rid of the guilt. She says, out, out, damned spot. And she keeps on washing her hands. And she says, all the perfumes of Arabia will not sweeten this little hand. Oh.
And how much
and
blood
that,
could an old man have?
Yes.
That also.
So that is how that is where her own disintegration begins. And ultimately, she has to die because in a crime novel, in a detective fiction, there is something called justice. There's something called justice. And here, probably the narrative logic is such that Lady Macbeth's death is something that is necessary, so she has to die. So let me come back to the point that getting into the psychology of the criminal is very important for a writer in order to understand why the crime takes place and what are the repercussions, and in order to get across to the readers the best way possible.
Yes, because the characters have to be very relatable. And in case we are not relating to our characters and out of the blue a crime is committed, we need to know what was the root cause of the mind going haywire there. Here, coming back to Manjiri over here, crime fiction and motion picture industry have complemented each other very well over the years, and even more now. There's so many young people over here, and how many of you are fans of Benedict Cumberbatch in the Sherlock Holmes series? Yes, I do see very eager, smiling faces over there. So, yes, coming to that, do you think contemporizing the classics has been a good step towards making them more popular and more to make the kids more accepting of the classics?
Definitely, if you haven't read them, more so.
Yes.
Yeah, because see, every medium has its plus and minus points, and I think films are a very, very powerful medium. If a book is adapted into films, it turns into another medium all in itself. For example, if you've written a scene, of a crime happening in a dark night, and you picturize it with the dramatic sounds and light effects and the characters, whatever, that whole scene takes on a new meaning. So even contemporizing the novel, the classics, and adapting them into films is a great step towards encouraging people to, youngsters to read those novels.
But don't you think sometimes it takes away the original essence? Like you might have a Dr. Watson today texting Sherlock Holmes, but this was certainly not happening in the times of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. So somewhere, some line is lost between the contemporary version because it is based on the works and not the real works as we were talking about originally.
I don't think they necessarily touch the core of the characters or the plots. All they're doing is depicting them and modernizing it so that it can relate to the present generation. So I don't think there's a loss of ideas. It's only a translation of the old classics into the new ideas.
And lots of young people are also into video games these days based on crime thrillers like Detective Cole Fleps and L.A. Noire. Do you think that has added to children's interest towards crime thrillers these days?
Video games, I'm not very, very familiar with them, but I think anything that entertains, whether it's books or films or video games, it is bound to generate some interest in a related medium. Okay. So if you're reading, you would like to see an animated version of it, whether it's a game or whether it's a film. So all these are interconnected. It's only the concept which transfers from one medium to another.
Yes, wonderfully said. Now back to Sharath over here. Closely tied to the issue of masculinity is also the female sexuality in crime thrillers. For example, the character of a femme fatale, frightening, the unknowable dominatrix, or they are quoted as somebody who is subversive and threatening. And since you are writing, your writings have been about very, very strong female protagonists, what do you say to the female protagonists in crime thrillers these days, which has come on very strongly in these novels these days?
I can't answer for other crime thrillers that have come out in the market, but when I write women, I do think I do like to write independent women, and I do think that sexual independence is a big part of being an independent woman. So I try to write sexually independent women. I don't know if I succeed or not. I don't have any first-hand experience of being a woman. So I've unfortunately. So, but I've been told that my women are reasonably well drawn. So, and I've been told that I write women like I write people. So I don't really treat a woman character as a woman. When I write them, I just think, okay, she's a person. What would a person do?
So your vision is very asexual. It doesn't mean it has to be a male or a female. You're looking at a criminal per se over there.
Correct.
Okay.
So, if my women are sexually independent, it is only because my men are also sexually independent. Right. So I don't really differentiate between men and women as characters when I'm writing about them.
So Criminal Mind basically is the grey matter gone wrong somewhere. It has nothing to do with the gender of a person. This is what you are trying to tell me.
Yeah, more or less.
So coming to Zach once again, as far the history of crime fiction is concerned, and you are coming from Sweden, even abroad we've seen, and even somewhere in India, authors have been very reluctant to write under their published crime novels under their real name, and they've been using pseudonyms over there. Right from the days of Ruth Rendell, who also wrote as Barbara Vine, to Evan Hunter as Ed McBain. What do you think has been the reason for somebody to write as a new name with no track record?
Well, one of the reasons why I write under a pen name is really because my real name is so unpronounceable that, like, if you would see it in some catalog or something, you would immediately forget it. And if you would go to the bookshop and try to ask for my books, you wouldn't be able to, even pronounce the name I was born with. So, like, I write under a pen name because it's like I've chosen one that is easy to remember and easy to identify, so that, like, it's really for your sake, dear readers, so that you can go to a bookshop or a shop, you can ask for, like, 6-pack of Thumbs Up, 1 Zacco, and, like, whatever else you want to do. So it's like about branding for my sake. And I think, like, some other writers also have used this as a branding tool. And even Hunter, for example, I mean, he was also trying to write some serious novels like Blackboard Jungle, which is about the problems in the education system in the USA, and which is not really like a crime novel. So he chose the name Ed McBain for his police series and all. Other people also use pseudonyms. If it's like a writer collective, they may like be 2 or 3 writers. So instead of having like lots of names on the cover, they use a single name. So I think, like, in many cases, it's all about branding. It's not necessarily about hiding the thing. But I suppose that there might be some writers who have, like, really dirty minds, but try to pretend that they're very neat and clean. So they'll do that pseudonym thing as well for those reasons. But otherwise, I don't think it's a really big thing. Like, lots of serious writers also use pseudonyms. So it's not like only
crime writers
who
in
do
fact,
that.
when I was reading on crime fiction, I came across another discovery that in the earlier 16th and 17th centuries, because crime thriller writing was not considered high art, when Shakespearean plays and music operas and other kind of serious literature was doing the rounds. So hence, if somebody wanted to write a crime thriller, they would use a pseudonym.
But I think that's like an older thing. Like, for me personally, I think it's also to a large extent to differentiate between, like, the private myself and the professional myself. So, like, because as a writer, essentially, if you're a full-time writer, what you do is that you're always at home, either you're in your bed or in your kitchen or at your desk, and you're writing books and things like that. And if one was always oneself, I mean, the same person, it would be very hard to differentiate it between a working time and when you're your normal self, when you're not a writer. So I have this thing, like, when I wake up in the morning, I'm usually myself, then I have my coffee, and then I turn into Zacco, and start a computer and start working on a novel. So it's also a way of because like other people who have real jobs, you know, you'll go to an office and there'll be like all the colleagues and all that, and you can differentiate that from when you're at home, you know. But for a writer, it's much harder because you're always at home.
Yes.
Yeah, you know, to know when am I working and when am I private, so to speak.
Yes, that's another side of you emerges. And as for a name, I can certainly side up with you on that, because even in my Janam Patri, my name was Murthy Devi, and certainly I will not be writing any books as Murthy Devi. So, over there. And now Manjiri wanted to ask Zach a question here, which I would let.
I just wanted to ask you, does it also have to do, in your case, with acceptability? Because you're writing about Bangalore and maybe a Zako name with the Bangalore local thing as an expert. Do you think that could have something to do with it? Because sometimes, yeah, you tell me.
No, I don't really know that. But you know, like for some of my foreign editions, like in the German one, they told me that like you can't write this as Zako here. You have to have an Indian sounding name. So like in the German edition was published on a title like Swami Parangi or something like that.
Yeah, but that's exactly what I meant. Yeah.
Now, the locked room mystery, which is something which is gaining momentum these days in terms of crime thriller writing, which is a specialized kind of whodunit, where it's perked the interest of young people, where it's a murder or a crime is committed under almost impossible circumstances. Nobody could have left the room or come inside the room. Why do you think that this kind of crime fiction is going into packed houses these days? All of you, I mean, anybody can answer this question. Anybody can answer this question. It's a common question.
Locked room, no?
Yeah.
I think that's a very outdated thing, no? Like this, that very sort of complicated type of murders where rooms are locked from the inside and you have to. I think that it would be very hard to do a locked room mystery today. Like the readers expect like realistic crimes and realistic crime scene investigation, not some Sherlock Holmes type who tries to figure out
I
how
think cyber crimes and also crimes committed with the help of new technology, that is what is gaining ground these days.
That is the modern...
Yes. But who done it? The locked room mystery is something which children are heavily into these days. Where it's like it's a murder committed under almost impossible circumstances. So it's like they are also looking for fresher avenues of exploration these days. That is, would you want to say something, Manjiri, to this?
Yeah, sure. I think
And Sharath? Yes. Yeah.
I think these things come in cycles, right? So there was this author called John Dixon Carr, who was a mystery fiction writer who specialized only in locked room mysteries. So he wrote, I think, about 80 or 90 locked room mysteries, where all sorts of impossible crimes were committed. Like a man is murdered in the middle of a snowfield where there are no footprints on the snow.
On the snow, yes.
That is like a variation of a locked room mystery, but not in a locked room, but outside. So it's an impossible crime. So the focus there is not besides the who done it. It's also about the how done it, as we talked about before. So the biggest mystery actually there is how did this guy come in here and how did he get out?
Yes.
Right? Without leaving any trace of being here. So that became a huge fad, I think, in the 50s, if I'm not wrong. And I think, and then the murder mystery sort of died a death. The structure of the murder mystery sort of blended into a crime fiction sort of structure. And now I think we are going back to I think we've skipped a generation now, and we're going back to the place where we are again sort of rediscovering the magic of, okay, how did this guy get into this room and how did he kill him and how did he get out, right? So I think that's just the natural cycle of things. It's just, genres sometimes go out of fashion and then come back into fashion.
And then come back to it. Manju?
I'd like to draw your attention to the fact that crime thrillers, mystery novels, detective fiction have always been there. It's not a new fad that started in the 60s or 70s and died out in between. It's always been there in some form or the other. For instance, we know about Shakespeare. Before that, even if you look at Sophocles, if you look at Greek drama, what is Oedipus Rex? Oedipus Rex is also about a murder that takes place. Oedipus's father has been killed and Oedipus does not realize that he himself is the criminal.
Yes.
He is looking for the murderer. So that again you find all the elements of the later murder mystery or crime fiction in Oedipus Rex. You have a crime that's been committed, you have a detective, you have a milieu. A milieu is very important. I'll come to that in a
Yes,
little while.
yes.
And you also have red herrings. Later they came to be called red herrings, but at that time in Sophocles' time they were not called red herrings. That means false clues.
Yes.
False clues leading you in a different direction, misleading you from the identity, from revealing the identity. So you have all these ingredients there, and murder mysteries, detective mysteries, crime fiction, they've always been there. Serious writers have also dabbled in it, whether it is Sophocles or whether it is Shakespeare or whether it is T.S. Eliot or Auden. They are all very canonical writers, and they've all dabbled in popular fiction, in detective stories, in crime thrillers from time to time. And of course, we have Zach Goya out here, who's also doing two different kinds of literature. He's creating serious literature as well
Yes.
as the popular genre, because as we are mixtures of high and low. We are mixtures of all that is popular and all that is serious, and that should go hand in hand, which is what crime thrillers do.
Yeah, there's a vast labyrinth of possibilities out there for a writer to delve into. But today, another thing that I'm coming across is that today's youth is quite fascinated with the anti-hero. It has become a battle between Joker versus Batman or Sherlock versus Moriarty. And today's youth, as well as older people like me, they all are fascinated with Moriarty's character. Do you think that it is a deliberate attempt on an author's part to make the intimidating character more fascinating for the readers? To all of you here?
Definitely.
Yes, Manjiri?
Yeah, because the more powerful the villain,
Yes.
the more powerful the hero. It's very simple. So the more layered and the more huge the villain is, that much more skill the hero needs to kind of conquer the evil.
Yes.
So I think that is basically the basics of it, that you make the villain powerful and then you have the hero more powerful than him. So that is really it.
As
And
an
that is why we
example-
have Lord Voldemort and Harry Potter, who's a boy.
Yes.
But Lord Voldemort is so huge.
Yes.
He's like
He's a
the wizard of
larger-than-life
larger
character.
than life character. He's the wizard of wizards, and here's this boy destroying Lord Voldemort. So where does that take Harry?
Yes.
So that is the equation, I
So
think.
when they are up against a character which seems indomitable, somewhere it's the anti-hero who takes on a bigger form than the hero.
An example
themselves.
that they would relate to is that film that came out a couple of years ago, Ravan. You have Ravan on the one hand, and on the other you have Jeevan. So the good and the bad, they are pitted against each other.
The other thing is that if you look at horror cinema, you'll find that I don't know if any of you watch horror cinema, but you may have noticed that like many of the victims, like these young people who go for a picnic into a dark forest and eat magic mushrooms, only to get slaughtered by some stalking serial killer. I mean, the young people are kind of stereotypes. They're like the typical college kids of one of this kind, one of that kind. One is a black guy, one is like a white guy, and one is a girl, and so on.
And sometimes also a Bipasha Basu there.
Yeah.
Most times
These kind of people.
she has to be there.
Whereas often the serial killer, the person stalking them, has a much more complex psychological background.
Yes.
If the film goes into exploring that, there'll be like a bad childhood, abusive parents, there'll be like growing up under very hard circumstances and so on. So the psychology of the killer in that kind of movies is often more complex. And you can just take like a film like Psycho by Alfred Hitchcock,
Yes.
for example. The hero of that film is is the villain. And I mean, we don't even remember the names of the other characters, but we do remember that Anthony Perkins played the psychopathic killer in the film Psycho. And he has this fascinating, bizarre relationship to his mother. His mother is dead, mummified in her apartments. And Anthony Perkins, his name, the film character's name is Norman.
Yes.
And sometimes Norman is normal. He's like a normal man. So he turns into the normal, shy hotel owner who doesn't kill his guests in the hotel. And sometimes Norman turns into Norma, which is the name of his mother.
Yeah.
And his mother, who has this hatred for all these women who come and stay in the hotel alone and feels an urge to knife them down in the shower cabin, like that. And so the main character in the film is really the villain. And so I think that has something to do with that, because the villain's psychology is often much more complex and interesting to explore than the typical victim who hasn't really done anything particular. Whose life doesn't mean anything except the fact that the person is going to get killed in the
So
story.
it is a dark, conflicted mind actually, which arouses more interest than a normal Norman out there. Another question to all of you is like, until the late 1960s, reading paperback edition of a crime thriller was somehow considered a little bit too way out, just a cracking airport read. And it was basically the highbrowed or the civilized world, as they would love to call them, would read Shakespeare or go for music operas or have go into a museum which are painting by renowned artists and go for famous literature and plays. But something has led to the change in this trend now. And that is the reason all of us are sitting here. What has led to the change? Why has this become so popular now? Sharath.
Yeah, they're all just giving me the mic. I'll try to answer this.
Yeah.
I'm right. I know. So I'm no sociologist or historian or anything, but I'll try and answer this.
Whatever your take is on it.
Sure. I think in modern life we have reached a stage where we can measure everything. Right? Popularity can be measured, sales can be measured. Everybody has so now the common reader has access to data about how many copies of
Yes.
a book sold,
Yes.
as opposed to what other people are thinking about it.
Yes.
Right? He also has access to what
Marketability.
right marketability.
He needs to keep the telling machines ringing. He needs to laugh his way to the bank. Any publishers here? They
Right.
would connect with this, wouldn't they?
And also, I think readers have an opportunity to find other readers like themselves.
Yes.
So instead of asking the question, what are somebody in authority talking about it, they can now ask, what is somebody like me talking about this book? Therefore, it'll give me a better idea of whether I would like it or not.
Yes.
So things like social media, like Amazon reviews, reading communities on Goodreads and so on, have connected readers to other readers, which have sort of enabled them to find books they will like, without having to resort to public, say, expert reviews or anything of the sort. So I think this democratization of information has sort of pushed the popular genres
Yes.
into
Ahead.
limelight and said, okay, well, this is popular. This actually pays our bills, and this actually
Yeah,
we
Man-
are,
brings
no,
in
we
more.
are living
Manjiri?
in times when authority has been eroded. And with this erosion of authority, the canon has been challenged. So what was considered to be high literature, serious literature at one time, there's a question mark against that, which is why other genres have been allowed, so to speak, to come forward. But Edgar Allan Poe, who wrote crime fiction, detective fiction, has always been part of the canon. So there is no hard and fast rule. There is no particular reason as such. It's just taste. Popular taste keeps changing, and there is a cyclical movement. One change gives place to another. And, the gods fulfill themselves in many ways, lest one good custom
Yes.
should corrupt the world.
Yes.
That's how it goes.
Yeah. Manjiri?
Yeah, I think it's not just crime fiction, but literature on the whole has become accessible to readers.
Yes.
And this has happened, I think, from the post-Chetan Bhagat era, where he wrote books that are actually accessible to college students and in a language which doesn't need dictionary and all. So people have started appreciating reading on the whole. And I think, so that is why it's not just crime fiction. Books are available everywhere, and people are aware that there are books because they have now taken to reading.
Yes.
I think, that is more it.
Yeah, adding to this, if I'll take a minute, I mean, I'm myself working on my 5th book, which will be called The Cry of Ravan, where I'm delving into the complex character called Ravan, where there's an effigy of Ravan that a village in an inebriated state forgets to burn, and this Ravan comes to life at midnight, and then his spirit flies all over, and he comes to Delhi, and he witnesses the 16 Decembers, the darkest memory that Delhi has today. And then he runs after the bus and he says, Ravan to main tha, phir tum kaun ho? So that character, so we all are working on those negative so-called negative characters from those times and bringing back to life and giving them the positive light that they so deserve. So it's almost criminal now to come to an end to this session. Please read the books, go back to crime thrillers, but let crime remain exactly where it should be, only in books. Thank you. Anybody in the audience who wants to ask questions, please?
What is your take on, now you're talking about live crimes, like, really people committing crimes, and especially in context of what you spoke about, closed door crimes, where it is impossible to find out the real thing, what happened inside the room. What is your take about psychic killings or spirit killings? I mean, it's there, like if you've watched Adalat and all of the last few episodes on TV, what's your take on that? I mean, what would you talk about?
Your question is direct. Would want to answer about psychic killings?
Sharath, I think you would be able to answer me.
Okay.
Because of the latest books that you have written are almost
Okay.
right.
Okay. Can you tell me what a psychic killing is? Because I don't know what psychic killing.
Psychic killing is spirit killing.
Sorry?
I mean, the real people are not there. Real people are not there, It's psychically done. That is, in spirit it is done.
Right. Okay. So that is probably a different genre altogether. It is horror, right? Where supernatural beings.
Yeah, supernatural or any spirit, any ghosts coming and killing and things like that.
Right. So, correct. So what is your question? Do you want my opinion on psychic killings in general, or do you want me to
No,
answer?
with in context of closed doors, how would you solve that crime?
I wouldn't. I hope I won't have to. No, yeah, I don't know.
Difficult question, is it? Because I had to just think it out. Maybe I'm not very clear in my questioning, but I think you understand me, Sharath.
Probably
No, I don't.
going to a healer might help a person like that because there is no
Ma'am,
there is no
it doesn't
criminal
help.
there.
Ma'am,
I'm
it doesn't
no voice
help.
on crime fiction. I'm their moderator, so they are the best people to answer this question.
But
yeah.
that'll be sort of genre crossing. If you have a supernatural being killing a person inside a locked room,
Yeah.
so that will be a
Maybe it's
horror and a
revenge.
murder mystery
Maybe it's
together.
a revenge killing also. A spirit who's dead and he comes back and kills you.
Right, but that is a horror and a murder mystery together.
Together,
So,
I suppose it's together,
correct.
right?
So
I
that will
think
be
it's
impossible to
together,
solve.
yeah. It is impossible to solve.
Yeah.
And
And
I-
Manju and Manjiri, I believe we are missing Haroon here from a previous session because he would have answered this question. Yes, Zach,
I
sorry.
just wanted to add a footnote. The other thing is that a crime novel, like a very good crime novel, is a very logical construction. And so a psychic entity being used as a murder weapon is not really feasible in a contemporary crime novel, really. Because then you're talking about a different genre, like fantasy horror, like Sharath was pointing out. And I think like a reader, like if the conclusion of your solution of your crime in a novel turns out to be some kind of hocus pocus thing, readers would be very disappointed and they would not recommend your book to any other reader because they'll feel cheated by that solution since it's not like a realistic, logical solution. And so trying to do psychic killings in a modern crime novel is probably the best way of falling off the bestseller lists.
So psychoanalyst queries have to be answered when the crime is committed.
May I add one point?
Yes, please.
A crime novel or a mystery or a detective novel is actually a very serious genre which has a purpose in mind, in the sense that it shows you the crime, which is something negative, but then the portrayal of the crime, there's a purpose behind it, that in spite of the crime, the world can be a good place, a happier place. So if you actually look back at what serious writers have said about crime fiction, for instance, Auden. What does Auden say? Auden says that if that a detective novel, a crime novel, will begin with a peaceful state of affairs, then there'll be a crime which will disturb that peaceful state of affairs, then the crime will be resolved, the criminal will be discovered and punished, and afterwards we will return to the peaceful state of affairs once again, although there'll be something missing in it. So there is that purpose behind it which you will not have in a supernatural story.
So We, as a writer, we have this responsibility that all of us are hefting on our shoulders, that we cannot cheat our readers. The entire generation is following your writing. Hence, they can't be cheated. So you have to give them relatable stuff. You have to tell them about people with flaws. Normal, dark, conflicted souls, yes, but they do exist, but at least not cheat our readers with something which is totally out of the world. Any other question, please?
My question is, in today's world, are mystery writers or crime writers getting inspired by what happens in reality, or are criminals getting inspired by what is being written in books or in movies?
Life inspires literature, and literature also gives a cue to readers and to writers too. I am very inspired by Zach today. I'll go back and I'll start a book today on murder in Chandigarh. Chandigarh is where I belong, because I am convinced that there should be some murder mysteries about my city too. Thank you,
I
Zach.
was afraid that you were going to say you're going to go back to Chandigarh and murder somebody.
Well, I've already done it in Pune. So I'm with you.
But the one thing is that, like, luckily criminals don't often read fiction. So, I mean, the chance that, like, our books will inspire somebody to do heinous crime, it's like fairly small. It has happened in a few cases. There was some tandoori murder in Delhi, which was copied
Naina murder,
from
yes.
a novel by Surendra Mohan Pathak, the Hindi thriller writer. I think, like, cinema is more inspiring for criminals. Like, if they look for ideas for, like, how to do heists and
A
plots.
negative
and that,
motivation coming
yeah.
into play there.
Yeah, and also the thing is that cinema has a different effect on the viewer than a book, because a book is a very analytical thing. It will force you as a reader to think. You'll think through the consequences. So you might, like, find it interesting, this murder part, but when you meditate as you read through the book, you will realize that it's not really feasible to murder somebody. Whereas in a film, if you see, like, this kind of extremely violent scenes, you get a different impression, and that may actually make a person more aggressive. I sincerely believe that cinema is kind of dangerous and very effective.
Yeah, it's served, ready-made served on the plate for a person, and not really to ponder over it. No ways how to get in and then skinge out of it equally, effortlessly. Anybody else with a question for our panelists? Yes, that I can see. Somebody from Haridwar, a murder is waiting to happen in Haridwar now, once we go back, because we have nothing to boast of there.
No,
Yes.
it's actually curious to know, like, when you write a crime fiction, what it takes to you, like, to come out from the negativity to the positivity which you have to end your novel with. I think it must be really difficult to do
louder,
that.
Slightly louder, please. Slightly louder.
So when you write a crime fiction, you have to end it in a positive note, right? So, but in between, it takes a lot of negative aspect to it. So what it takes from coming out of that negative aspect and actually closing it on a positive note. So that is something.
That goes for all great literature. Because all great literature must have a mixture of whatever there is in the world, good and bad, and violence and non-violence and so on. And if you're referring to somebody like Shakespeare or one of the classics, there is what is called this sense of tragic waste. This sense of tragic waste, that in the world there is a lot of goodness that is wasted, that because of evil, but in spite of that, there is still some goodness that remains.
I think what it takes is your question, right? So what it takes is basically honesty in terms of the from the author. Because if the author is honest, he will know that there's both good and bad in him. There's both good and bad in the world. So if he's actually honest, he will see the good for what it is, see the bad for what it is. And as she was saying, a novel has to have both good and bad in it. And in fact, it is a job of the writer to be faithful to both the good and the bad elements. So I think what it takes in one word is basically honesty.
Yes, so basically I believe all literature will aim towards the end of the story, will always aim at rewarding what was positive and what was good, and make sure that the evil does incur its punishment. So not just crime fiction. Anybody else? Yes, please. Do so, but yes.
So in a lot of series where they have either you have Poirot or if you have Feluda, when you have so many novels, the pattern of finding the culprit tends to get repetitive. So it's either someone is suspected and it was someone completely different in the end, or maybe it's someone the detective suspected but no one believed him. So when the author follows this kind of pattern, what actually makes it interesting for the readers to keep coming back and making those series so popular?
Character has been portrayed very, very negatively. If I'm right here, please feel free to correct me in case I go wrong here. That a certain character has been painted very, very negatively, and nobody is believing what he's trying to say, and yet he comes back towards the end with a revelation. So how does the author process that storyline in between?
No, sorry, I'll just rephrase.
Yeah, be slightly louder.
Loudly and clearly, please.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you take Hercule Poirot as an example,
Hercule Poirot.
Most of the whenever he solves a mystery, there's usually a pattern that ensues in all the books. For example, he initially thinks it's one person, but it turns out to be someone he never suspected initially. So in a lot of the books that I've read, where they have a long series, they follow this kind of pattern throughout. So what actually makes it so interesting that the readers keep coming back and reading them?
You know, in detective fiction, there is an essential ingredient called the LSP, least suspected person.
Yeah.
For instance, it can be Oedipus himself, who thinks he's the sleuth, the detective, but it turns out to be the murderer. Or it can be the postman whom nobody suspects. So LSP, or the least suspected person, is there in crime fiction. And that is what holds your interest.
So, since you're talking about Hercule Poirot, if you've read The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, have you read that book?
No.
Okay, so that is my Bible. In that book, the narrator of the story is the murderer. And you just know it in the end. So this is like you said, the least suspected person who's narrating the whole novel is actually the murderer, which is the height of everything. But taking on from there, what is really important is to keep the element of surprise alive in a murder mystery. And that requires a lot of skill and planning, like he said. It really has to be logical, but you have to keep the element of surprise totally alive right till the end, so that in the end, when you reveal the murderer, the reader should not feel cheated. Although he's been cheated all along, he shouldn't be cheated. In fact, he should feel surprised. And that is what I think is very skillful in a murder mystery.
And it's not necessary that the criminal may be just one person, as Manju was discussing with me. It could be an entire institution, a milieu. It could be anything.
Murder on the
not just
Orient
one
Express,
person.
for instance. And then there is something called cliffhanging action. You know, the cliffhanger action, which keeps you on the edge of the chair.
Yes,
which
tenterhooks.
keeps you hooked on.
Anybody else? Does that answer your query? Yes, please. A mic. One more question.
Sorry,
Yes, it's
thankfully
okay.
I have come at a place where it's the last question, and I'm a bit sinful because I walked in over here and I saw this happening. I haven't followed the discussion that has happened so far. And you can choose to not answer this if it's not relevant or if it has been asked before already.
Please ask your
But
question, no issues here.
Yeah, but when it comes to the murder mysteries, general murder fiction all through, there are two murders that are happening. One, I mean theoretically, one is the murder that is committed at the beginning, the murder that is committed at the beginning of the story,
Yes.
or the beginning of the sequence of events. And the end, where the murderer is apprehended and caught and is punished by society for having committed the murder, whether it happens through the through detection or circumstance and so on and so forth. And that is the general trope based on which the murder sort of mystery, I mean the fact that the I mean justification or whatever you call it stands. Do you, amongst all of you, know of any story, short or long, where the murderer actually gets away and the author or the reader is being made to root for the murderer and actually kind of agrees that they have gotten away? I
Zach,
don't know
would
whether
you like
this has
to
been
answer
asked
this?
already yet.
Gets away fairly nicely. Like he kills off several people, and he's a bit of a psycho. And ultimately, he's actually not apprehended, as far as I remember. It's a very fascinating thriller because it also follows more Ripley himself, who is the killer, than any. I mean, the detectives are like outside people, so it's more from his point of view, even. So you should read that book if you're interested in exploring this question.
So So we conclude this session here. I guess we are way past our time also. But thank you so much for showing interest in the criminal mind in all of us.
Thank you for your patience.
Thank you so much.
And if you want signed copies of our books, we'll sign them for free, but you may have to pay something in the bookshop.